When the sharp crack of a slap silenced our Sunday dinner, my son-in-law smoothed his tie and smirked, thinking his violence was safe within these walls. He saw only a frail pensioner living in his guest room, grateful for scraps. He did not know that for 30 years. I destroyed men like him for a living. I quietly wiped the spilled wine, walked to the back porch, and dialed the one number that would burn his perfect life to the ground. My name is Joanna Mercer, and for the last 6 months, I have lived as a guest in my own daughter's life. The heavy ceramic platter of roast chicken trembled slightly in my hands as I lowered it onto the center of the long oak table. I am 62 years old, and my wrists are not as strong as they once were. Yet I forced the corners of my mouth up into the polite, grateful smile that seemed to be the only currency accepted in this house in Alder Creek. Oregon. The dining room smelled of rosemary and tension. My daughter, Emily, sat at the edge of her seat, her posture rigid, her eyes darting between the steaming food and her husband at the head of the table. Derek Lawson was laughing at something on the small television screen flickering in the adjacent kitchen, his voice booming and taking up far too much space in the room. Beside him, my grandchildren, Sophie and Liam, were engaged in a silent, kicking battle under the table while fighting over a basket of rolls. I reached for the chair next to Liam, but Emily's hand shot out, touching my arm lightly. Her voice was low, barely a whisper. "Mom, maybe you can grab the salad bowls from the counter first. Just let us get settled." She pulled her hand back quickly, as if burned. It was a simple request, but the tone carried a chill that had become familiar. I was not the matriarch here. I was not even a mother. I was the help. I nodded, swallowing the lump of pride that rose in my throat, and turned back to the kitchen counter. As we finally settled into the rhythm of the meal, Derek stabbed a potato with his fork and looked at me with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "Careful with the oven next time." "Joe," he said, his voice dripping with a faux conviviality that made my skin crawl. "We don't want another incident like last week, I swear. Emily, I think your mother is losing a step. Maybe two." Emily forced a laugh, a brittle sound that cracked in the air. "Oh, Derek. Stop. It was just a timer error." Sure. Derek chuckled, winking at Sophie. "We just have to watch out for Grandma. Sometimes the wires get a little crossed." I chewed my chicken, the meat tasting like sawdust. I said nothing. I had learned that silence was the tax I paid for the roof over my head. Then it happened. Emily reached for the pepper shaker. Her elbow clipped her wine glass. It was a small, clumsy movement, the kind that happens at millions of dinner tables every night. The crystal goblet tipped. Red wine splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a fresh wound. The chatter stopped instantly. The television noise seemed to vanish. Derek stood up. He did not shout. He did not throw his plate. He moved with a terrifying, coiled efficiency. He reached across the corner of the table and grabbed Emily's wrist. His grip was white-knuckled. "Derek, please," Emily whispered, her face draining of color. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." He looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are so clumsy. It is pathetic." The slap was not loud. It was a sharp, flat crack, like a dry branch snapping under a boot. It was quick, efficient, and precise. Sophie gasped. Liam froze with a roll halfway to his mouth. Emily's hand flew to her cheek, her eyes wide and wet, covering the red mark that was already blooming on her pale skin. She stared at the table, her shoulders shaking, whispering into her palm, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I sat frozen. I did not scream. I did not lunge across the table. Instead, I felt something inside my chest simply snap. It was a clean, silent break, distinct and final. It was the same sensation I had felt 7 years ago when the doctor told me my husband, Paul, was gone. It was the physical sensation of a door locking forever, the Joanna who was a grateful guest, the Joanna who was afraid of being a burden, died in that chair. Derek adjusted his cufflinks, exhaling loudly as if he were the victim of a great inconvenience. "Go upstairs," he told the children, his voice calm. "Now." The children scrambled away, their footsteps heavy on the stairs. Derek looked at me. His eyes were cold, daring me to speak. "Don't look at me like that. Joe," he said, sitting back down and picking up his napkin. "Stress at Silverhawk is killing me. I don't need chaos at home. And don't you make a big scene out of this." Emily was crying silently now, a soundless shaking that vibrated the table. I stood up slowly. I did not look at Derek. I picked up a cloth napkin and placed it over the wine stain, absorbing the red liquid. "I'll clear the table," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded like someone else's voice. I carried the stack of plates into the kitchen. I did not wash them. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, reached into my pocket, and pulled out my cell phone. The screen lit up the darkened kitchen. I walked out the back door onto the porch. The Oregon night was biting cold, the wind rustling the pine trees that bordered the yard. I inhaled the freezing air, letting it fill my lungs, clearing the smell of fear and roast chicken from my senses. I scrolled past the contacts I used daily. I stopped at a name I had not called in over 4 years, a name from a life I thought I had left behind. Marcy. Private hotline. My thumb hovered over the call button. Inside that house, my son-in-law thought he had just disciplined his wife. He thought he was the king of his castle. He had no idea that he had just slapped the daughter of a woman who used to hunt monsters for a living. I sat on the cold concrete step of the back porch, the wood of the door frame pressing into my spine. Through the glass and the thin layer of cheap insulation, I could hear him. Derek was not shouting anymore. His voice had dropped to that low, steady register that is far more terrifying than a scream. It was the tone of a man patiently explaining to a child why they deserved to be punished. "You embarrassed me, Emily," I heard him murmur. The words, muffled but distinct. "In front of your mother? In front of the kids?" I closed my eyes and pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. It smelled faintly of lemon dish soap and the bleach I used to scrub their white tile floors. It was the scent of my existence here. I remembered the day I moved in, exactly 6 months ago. I had slipped on a patch of black ice in my driveway in Maple Falls, shattering my right wrist. The doctor had looked at my chart, then at Emily, and suggested that living alone might be ill-advised for a woman of my age during recovery. "Mum, don't worry about anything," Emily had said, squeezing my good hand, while Derek nodded benevolently in the background. "Derek and I will take care of everything. We have plenty of room. You just rest." I had felt a warm rush of gratitude then, mixed with the sharp, acidic taste of shame. I was leaving the house in Maple Falls where I had lived for 32 years. I was leaving the garden I had planted with Paul, the creaky floorboard in the hallway, the independence that defined me. I thought I was being a mother allowing her daughter to care for her. I did not realize I was signing a contract to become invisible. The erosion of my life happened slowly, in tiny, helpful increments. First, it was the mail. I switched your bank statements to paperless. Mom? Derek had announced one evening, tapping away on his laptop. It is safer. I set the recovery email to mine, just so you don't get locked out. Then it was the car keys, hung up on the hook because your eyes aren't what they used to be at night. Joe. Then it was the cooking. I spent hours in that kitchen, chopping vegetables, seasoning meats, trying to earn my keep. Yet, when dinner was served, the dynamic shifted. Mom, why don't you grab your plate after we get the kids settled? Emily would say, avoiding my eyes. Let the guests. Let Derek eat while it is hot. I became the ghost in the machine of their domestic life. I was the hands that folded the laundry, the shadow that wiped the counters, the ears that heard the silence grow heavy in the hallways. I had seen the signs before tonight. I chose not to see them. 3 months ago, I saw a bruise on Emily's wrist, blooming like a dark plum under her watch strap. I tripped on the stairs carrying the laundry basket. She had laughed. But the sound was too high, too brittle. Derek had walked in then, wrapping his arms around her from behind, kissing the top of her head while looking straight at me. She is so clumsy, isn't she, Joe? I have to watch her like a hawk. I had smiled. I had actually smiled back at him. There were other nights. The sound of something heavy falling in their bedroom. The way the house seemed to hold its breath when Derek's car pulled into the driveway after a long day at what he called the Wall Street of the West. The way Emily would instantly stop whatever she was doing to check her reflection, terror masking itself as attentiveness. I had practiced the question a dozen times in front of the bathroom mirror. Does he hit you? But every time I walked into the kitchen and saw her making school lunches with trembling hands, the question died in my throat. It softened into something cowardly. Are you tired, honey? I would ask instead. Just a little, she would say, and the moment would pass, lost in the hum of the refrigerator and the illusion of safety. But tonight, the illusion was gone. The sound of that slap was still ringing in my ears, sharper than the wind cutting through the yard. It was a clean break. There was no more ambiguity. If I stayed silent now, I was not keeping the peace. I was an accomplice. I was no longer the mother protecting her child. I was just another spectator waiting for the next blow. Standing in the darkness of the porch, I closed my eyes and let the cold wind peel back the layers of the old woman I had become. Long before I was the silent guest in the downstairs bedroom, I was just Joanna from Ohio. I was a girl who saved every nickel from waitressing to pay for cover charges at the jazz clubs in Cleveland. I was the one who wore scuffed heels and danced until my feet throbbed, alive with a rhythm that felt like promise. That was where I met Paul. He was a mechanic with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints and a smile that made me forget I was tired. We moved to Alder Creek with nothing but a beat-up sedan and a dream of a quiet life. We raised 2 girls here. Emily was always the pragmatic one, the organizer who color-coded her homework and planned her days in 15-minute increments. But Hannah was my shadow. She was the artist, the messy soul who sat on the counter while I kneaded dough, asking me to tell her stories about the women I helped at the cooperative. When Paul's heart stopped on a Tuesday morning, I did not have the luxury of falling apart. The mortgage was due on the 1st of the month. The electric bill was waiting on the counter. I was back at my desk at Northwind Outreach Cooperative exactly 3 days after the funeral. I put on my coat, kissed my girls, and went to work because the world does not stop for a widow's grief. I thought I was showing them resilience. I see now that Emily only saw coldness. She saw a mother who did not look back. My work was not pretty. It was answering the hotline at 2 a.m, my voice rough with sleep but steady with purpose. It was driving to unfamiliar driveways to pick up women who had finally decided to run, their faces swollen and their children crying in pajamas. I sat in strangers' kitchens, holding trembling hands while they signed restraining orders. I knew every sheriff's deputy by name. I knew the specific, terrified look in a woman's eye when she realized love had turned into a cage. The irony is a bitter pill to swallow tonight. I spent 30 years pulling strangers out of burning houses. Yet here I am, watching my own daughter sit inside one, and I just stood there and let it burn. Then Hannah died. A car accident on a rainy stretch of highway when she was just 23. That loss did not just break my heart, it hollowed me out. After that, Emily was all I had left. I held on to her too tight. I promised myself I would not lose anyone else. Emily looked at my life and decided she wanted the opposite. She saw the late nights and the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. She wanted safety, but she mistook money for security. That was why she chose Derek. She saw his suit, his portfolio, his confidence, and she thought she had found a fortress. I remember the only time I ever truly raised my voice at her regarding him. It was 5 years ago. She came to tell me she was quitting her job at the community clinic to work under Derek at Silverhawk Holdings. She was so proud of the salary, of the prestige. Money that you don't earn yourself is a leash. Emily. I had told her, my voice sharp with a fear she could not understand. When he controls the paycheck, he controls the choices. You are giving away your power. Emily had looked at me, her eyes hard and defensive. I don't want to live like you, Mom. Working all your life just to pay the electric bill. I want more. Derek takes care of me. That sentence hung between us for years. To Emily, I was not a survivor or a savior. I was a cautionary tale of mediocrity. She never listened to my warnings about men like Derek, because she never respected the life I built without one. She thought poverty was the enemy. So she ran straight into the arms of a wealthy tyrant. She did not know that the most dangerous man is not the one who cannot pay the bills, but the one who pays them all and expects to own you in return. I still remember the first time Derek Lawson walked into my living room. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him a little too perfectly, and his smile was a practiced weapon, calibrated to disarm. He sat on my worn velvet sofa, crossing his legs with the ease of a man who owned the room he had just entered. He spoke smoothly about his position as a senior manager at Silverhawk Holdings in Portland, making sure to drop the names of clients and the size of portfolios. It takes a special kind of saint to do what you do. Joanna, he had said, leaning forward with a look of manufactured admiration. Helping those women. It is truly noble work. At the time, I thought he was charming. But even then, my instincts prickled. I noticed how he answered for Emily before she could open her mouth. If we went out to dinner, he ordered for her. If I asked about their vacation plans, he dictated the itinerary while she nodded. He just takes care of everything, Emily would say with a laugh that sounded more like a defense mechanism. I don't have to worry about a single detail. I stayed silent then, filing the information away. But living in their house, the picture became terrifyingly clear. Derek did not just handle the details, he hoarded them. He controlled every credit card, the mortgage, the car leases, and even Emily's student loans. Every digital notification, every bank alert, every password was routed to a single email address that only he could access. The real crack in the facade appeared one quiet Tuesday afternoon, about 2 months ago. Emily had asked me to help her print some tax forms from the home office printer because the wireless connection was acting up. While she was downstairs looking for paper, a notification popped up on the desktop screen. It was an automated confirmation from a lending agency. I leaned in, adjusting my glasses. The email was confirming the approval of a personal loan for $20,000. That was not the strange part. The strange part was the applicant's name, Joanna Mercer, and the address listed was my old cottage in Maple Falls, a house I no longer owned. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrolled down quickly before the screensaver could activate. The disbursement account was not mine. It was routed to a business account under the name Lawson Consulting LLC. I had worked at Northwind long enough to recognize the pattern immediately. A man who hits you will almost always steal from you first. Financial abuse is the silent twin of physical violence. It is about removing the victim's ability to leave. But Derek was arrogant. He had reached beyond his wife and stolen my identity to secure credit, using a shell company to wash the money. I did not scream. I did not run downstairs. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket and snapped 3 clear photos of the screen. I captured the loan number, the shell company name, and the dates. Over the next few weeks, I became a spy in my own temporary home. I watched him when he thought I was napping. I saw the invoices he left carelessly on the counter, disguising transfers as consulting fees that moved from Silverhawk client accounts into his personal LLC. I realized he was not just living beyond his means. He was likely embezzling funds or laundering money through client retirement accounts. I called an old friend who worked for the IRS in Portland, keeping the conversation hypothetical. If someone moves client money into a personal LLC under the guise of consulting, my friend had told me that is wire fraud. And if they are using a relative's identity to leverage debt to cover the tracks, well, that is a federal crime. I kept everything, every photo, every printed receipt. Every scrap of evidence went into a hidden folder on my old laptop, password protected. The physical copies were in a manila envelope taped to the underside of the lining in my suitcase. I had told myself it was just an insurance policy, a vague weapon I might need if he ever tried to hurt Emily during a divorce. But the slap at dinner changed the calculus. Derek was not just a domestic tyrant. He was a financial bomb waiting to detonate. If I did not cut the wire now, he would drag Emily, the children, and me down into the wreckage of his crimes. He thought he was untouchable, but he had made a fatal error. He had underestimated the old woman who cleaned his kitchen. The screen of my phone was the only light on the back porch, glowing cold against the darkness of the yard. My thumb hovered over the call button, trembling slightly. It was not the tremor of my 62 years, nor was it the chill of the Oregon wind. It was the vibration of a decision being made. I knew that the moment I pressed this button, the uncomfortable peace we had maintained for 6 months would be shattered. There would be no going back to polite dinners or pretending I did not see the fear in my daughter's eyes. I took a breath that tasted of pine and impending war, and I pressed the icon. Northwind Crisis Line. This is Marcy. The voice answered on the second ring, crisp and alert. Marcy. It is Joanna, I said, keeping my voice low. Joanna Mercer. There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a shift in tone. Joanna, my God, it has been ages. Is everything all right? No, I said, cutting through the pleasantries. I need to open a file. Incident of domestic violence. Physical assault in the presence of minors. The perpetrator is Derek Lawson. The victim is Emily Lawson. And I have evidence of financial coercion and identity fraud involving a senior citizen. The silence on the line was heavy, but when Marcy spoke again, the friend was gone, and the supervisor was back. Okay. I have a pen. Tell me everything. I gave her the facts, stripping away the emotion as if I were reading a case study from 20 years ago. I described the dinner, the spilled wine, the slap, the children freezing in their chairs. I told her about the loan taken out in my name and the shell company. Joanna, listen to me, Marcy said, her voice sharp. We can send a cruiser right now, but you know how that goes. If he talks his way out of it tonight, he comes back angrier. So, I need you to answer the standard question. What do you want to protect first? Physical safety, the assets, or both? It was the question we always asked, the triage of survival. Both, I whispered. But no sirens tonight. The children are upstairs. If police kick down the door now, Sophie and Liam will never forget it. I want to do this the hard way, the permanent way. Smart, Marcy replied. If you have proof he used your name for that loan, that is federal. That is not just a domestic dispute anymore. That is a felony. That is our leverage. We will open a high-risk file tonight. You get the documents ready. We build the cage before we slam the door. I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness for a moment longer. I thought of the hundreds of women I had sat with in fluorescent-lit station lobbies, holding their hands while they shook. I had always told them that patience was a weapon if used correctly. Now, I had to believe it myself. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I was not a mother begging a son-in-law for kindness anymore. I was a caseworker, and he was the subject. I walked back into the kitchen. The warmth of the house hit me, stifling and artificial. Emily was standing by the sink, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. Her eyes were red, rimmed with swollen flesh where the tears had dried. Through the archway, I could see the living room. Derek was reclined in his leather chair, watching the news. His face relaxed, as if he had not just struck his wife across the face 30 minutes ago. The children were on the rug, their faces illuminated by the blue light of their tablets, lost in a game, pretending the noise earlier had not happened. I walked over to Emily. I did not ask why she stayed. I did not ask if it hurt. Those questions are useless to a victim still in the fog. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her body rigid with tension. I reached up and brushed my thumb near her cheekbone, feeling the heat radiating from the skin. She flinched. "Mom, she stammered, her voice breaking. I leaned in close to her ear, keeping my voice so low that even the walls could not hear. "It is okay," I soothed. Then I hardened my tone, just a fraction. "Tomorrow morning. I am going to need to borrow your printer for a little while." Emily looked at me, confused. But she saw something in my eyes that made her stop. She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. I went to my room. It was the guest room, small and cluttered with the boxes I had not unpacked. I opened my old laptop. The screen hummed to life. I found the hidden folder, the photos of the loan application, the bank transfers, the shell company documents. I composed a new email. I added Marcy's private address. I added the email of my contact at the IRS. I attached the files. The subject line was simple. For the file, Lawson case. I hit send. I watched the progress bar complete. Then, I went to the sent folder and deleted the email. I went to the trash folder and emptied it. I shut down the computer and pulled the charging cable from the wall. It was a small act, but it felt like locking the chamber of a gun. The war had started, and Derek Lawson was already losing, even if he was sleeping soundly upstairs. The house was silent at 5 a.m, save for the rhythmic, mechanical whir of the printer in the downstairs office. I stood over the machine, watching it spit out the paper trail of my son-in-law's treachery. I collated the bank statements, the emails from the shell company, and the screenshot of the loan application he had made in my name. I organized them into a neat stack, slid them into a plain brown dossier, and placed the entire package into my old canvas tote bag, stamped with the faded blue logo of the Northwind Outreach Cooperative. When I walked into the kitchen at 7, dressed in my good coat, Derek was already drinking his coffee. He glanced at my bag with zero interest. "I have a doctor's appointment this morning." I lied, my voice level. "Just a routine checkup for my wrist." Derek waved a hand dismissively, not bothering to look away from his phone. "Fine. Just don't expect Emily to drive you. She has a full day with the kids. You can take the bus, right, or call a cab. Just don't be late for dinner prep." "I can manage," I said. Emily looked up from packing Sophie's lunchbox, worry creasing her forehead. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to me. "Mum, are you sure? Can you go alone? I can maybe move some things around." I patted her arm, feeling the tension in her muscles. "I am fine, sweetheart. You take care of the kids." I took a taxi to the Northwind office. The building had not changed much in the years since I retired. It still smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Marcy met me in the small conference room at the back. She did not hug me. She simply closed the door and locked it. I laid the dossier on the table. Marcy put on her reading glasses and went through the papers. Her face remained impassive, but I saw her jaw tighten when she reached the photographs I had printed the bruise on Emily's wrist, the dark mark on her neck from 3 months ago. "This is not just a domestic dispute anymore, Joe," Marcy said, tapping the financial documents. "This is systematic dismantling of a person. He is isolating her. He is hurting her. And he is stealing from you to fund it." A young legal aide joined us 10 minutes later. Together, we drafted the affidavit. I dictated the dates and times. I listed the shouting matches, the sound of breaking glass, the way Emily would wear long sleeves in the summer. We categorized the risk. "We are opening a high-risk file," Marcy stated, stamping the folder with a red ink block. "Violence in the presence of minors triggers mandatory reporting protocols if it escalates. We are drafting an emergency restraining order today. We will keep it in the chamber the moment you give the signal, or if he touches her again. We file it with the court." By 2 p.m, I was sitting in a booth at a quiet coffee shop downtown, across from Martin. We had not spoken in years, but he had agreed to meet immediately when I mentioned tax fraud. Martin worked for the IRS, and he had the eyes of a man who had seen every trick in the book. He reviewed the spreadsheet I had compiled of Derek's transfers. He took a long sip of his black coffee and sighed, shaking his head. "Derek is playing a very dangerous game," Martin said, his voice low. "Moving client funds into a personal consulting LLC is classic embezzlement. but doing it using your identity to secure the leverage. If what you have here is authentic, he is looking at federal prison time, not just a slap on the wrist. Years. Can we stop him? I asked. I will forward this to the Criminal Investigation Division today, Martin promised, sliding the papers into his briefcase. But listen to me, Joanna. Do not tell your daughter about the money yet. If she panics and confronts him before the freeze is in place, he could drain the accounts and run. Let the system blindside him. On my way back to the house, I made one final stop at the local bank branch. I asked the teller to run a full credit check on my social security number. She handed me the printout with a polite smile that faded when she saw my expression. There was another line of credit, opened just 2 weeks ago, for $5,000. The guarantor was Derek Lawson. I walked out into the cold afternoon air. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. When I returned to the house, dinner was a quiet affair, but something had shifted. Derek was pacing the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear, his face flushed with irritation. I don't know what you are talking about. He snapped into the receiver. Why is internal audit flagging my accounts? It is a clerical error. Fix it. He slammed the phone down on the granite counter. Emily flinched. Is everything okay, Derek? She asked softly. Just some idiots at corporate, he muttered, loosening his tie aggressively. Some weird inquiry from the compliance department. They are freezing some of my access pending a review. It is ridiculous. I sat at the end of the table, stirring a teaspoon of sugar into my chamomile tea. The metal spoon clinked softly against the china. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I watched him panic. I watched the first crack appear in his perfect armor. And I said absolutely nothing. The air inside the house grew heavy over the next few days, thick with a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. Derek was unraveling. He was no longer the smooth, confident executive who charmed neighbors at block parties. He was a cornered animal. He spent his evenings pacing the length of the living room, checking his phone every 30 seconds, muttering curses under his breath. These compliance idiots. I heard him spit into the receiver one evening, his voice tight. They are just paper pushers. They don't understand a single thing about market pressure. Tell them to back off. I watched him from my armchair in the corner. I noticed the way the level in the whiskey decanter dropped significantly each night. He started taking his calls on the back porch, standing in the freezing wind, chain smoking. Whenever I walked into the kitchen to make tea, he would abruptly end his calls, shoving the phone into his pocket and glaring at me as if I were a spy. In a way, I was. Emily responded to the rising tension by trying to become invisible through perfection. She cooked elaborate dinners that no one had the appetite to eat. She scrubbed the baseboards until her knuckles were raw. She forced a bright, frantic cheerfulness with the children, laughing too loud at their jokes, trying to drown out the silence of her husband with noise. Everything is fine, she would whisper to herself when she thought I wasn't listening. We are just fine. The inevitable fracture happened on a Thursday night. We were at the dinner table. Sophie reached for a glass of water, her small hand slippery with butter from the corn on the cob. The glass slid. It hit the tile floor with a crash that sounded like a gunshot. Water and shards of glass exploded across the kitchen. Derek slammed his fists onto the table, the silverware jumping. For God's sake, Sophie, he roared, his face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over, He took a step toward the trembling child. I did not think. I did not calculate. I moved with a speed that defied my aching joints. I stood up and placed myself directly between Derek and my granddaughter. I am 5 feet 4 inches tall, and he towered over me. But in that moment, I felt like a wall of concrete. "You stop right there," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was absolute. "Your hands will not touch a single child in this house, not ever." Derek froze. He looked down at me, blinking, as if seeing me for the first time. He expected the doddering old woman who forgot to turn off the oven. Instead, he saw the woman who had stared down violent men in police station lobbies for 30 years. For a second, I saw genuine hesitation in his eyes, followed by a flicker of fear. He sneered, trying to regain his dominance. "You are crazy, old woman. You are losing your mind." He turned and stormed out of the kitchen, kicking the fallen chair as he went. The slam of the bedroom door upstairs shook the ceiling. The kitchen was silent, save for Sophie's quiet whimpering. The next morning, the gears of the system began to grind. Marcy called me while I was at the grocery store. "It is happening." She told me Silverhawk officially opened an internal investigation this morning. They received an anonymous tip about irregular commission structures and potential money laundering. That was Martin. He came through. I felt a cold satisfaction, but I knew a wounded predator was most dangerous right before the end. I spent the afternoon securing my own perimeter. I went to the bank and transferred a significant portion of my savings into a new account that Derek could not trace. I made photocopies of my identity documents and the evidence I had gathered, sealing them in a waterproof bag and taping it under the passenger seat of my old sedan parked in the garage. That evening, I was folding laundry in the hallway when I heard voices drifting from the master bedroom. The door was cracked open just an inch. "She is getting worse." "Emily," Derek was saying, his voice dripping with fake concern. "The way she looked at me tonight. The aggression. It is dementia. I have seen it before. We need to look into a facility, a nursing home. I can get power of attorney to help manage her assets so we can pay for it." My blood ran cold. He was not just trying to get rid of me. He was planning to seize what little I had left to cover his own debts. I did not storm in. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the voice memo app, and held it near the crack in the door. "I don't know. Derek." Emily sounded weak, exhausted. "She is my mother. It is for her own good." He pressed, the manipulations smooth and practiced, and for the safety of the kids. We can't have her snapping like that. I recorded every word. I saved the file and immediately emailed it to Marcy. I typed a short message. "Evidence of attempted exploitation of a senior. Add it to the pile." I walked back to my room, my heart hammering a steady rhythm against my ribs. He thought he was checkmating a confused old lady. He did not know I had already flipped the board. Saturday morning arrived with a deceptive brightness, the kind of crisp, sunny day that makes dark secrets feel heavier by contrast. I told Derek we were going to the farmer's market to buy organic honey for his tea. He barely looked up from his tablet, waving us away with a grunt of approval for anything that served his comfort. I drove Emily's SUV, my hands tight on the wheel. When I turned left instead of right toward the market, she looked at me, confused. "Mum, the market is down on 4th, she said. "We are not going to the market." "Emily," I replied, my voice steeling itself against the tremor in hers. "We are going to visit where I used to work. 10 minutes later, we walked into the Northwind Outreach Cooperative. The smell of the office toner, stale coffee, and faint cleaning fluid hit me like a memory of war. Emily looked around nervously, clutching her purse. When Marcy walked out of her office and guided us into a private consultation room, the air shifted. On the table lay a file. The tab read, Lawson, Emily, high risk. Emily stared at it, her face draining of colour. Mom? What is this? Marcy sat down, not as a friend, but as the counsellor she had been for 20 years. She opened the folder. This is a timeline. Emily. Joanna has been documenting things, but I need to hear it from you. Marcy tapped a photo of a bruise on Emily's wrist. Tell me. Did you really trip on the stairs? Emily looked at me, betrayal flashing in her eyes. He didn't mean to. He is just under so much pressure at the firm. You don't understand the stress he carries. I understand stress, Marcy said softly. But stress does not leave fingerprints on a neck. Stress does not make a grown woman afraid to drop a fork. You are making a big deal out of nothing. Emily's voice rose, shrill and desperate. He loves me. He provides for us. Mom is just... She is just overreacting because she is old and lonely. The words stung, but I did not flinch. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. I have sat in this exact chair with 1,000 women. Emily, I said gently, doctors, lawyers, wives of judges. You are not the only one, and you are not the worst case. But you will be, if we don't stop it. Marcy pushed a piece of paper forward. We call this a safety plan. We need to pack a bag. Copies of birth certificates, passports, social security cards, a burner phone. Joanna tells me a friend has a vacant apartment at Maple Court. It is furnished. It is safe. It is ready. Emily shook her head, tears finally spilling over. She did not sign the paper, but she did not push it away either. The drive home was silent for the first 3 miles. Then, as we idled at a red light, Emily made a sound, a choked, wet sob that broke the dam. It wasn't just the slap at dinner, she whispered, staring out the window. I put the car in park, even though the light turned green. Tell me. Last month. She stuttered, her breath hitching. I told him I didn't want to go to the partners' dinner because Sophie had a fever. He dragged me into the garage. She took a jagged breath. He pinned me against the wall. He put his hands around my throat. Mum. He squeezed until I saw spots. He said if I ever embarrassed him by being absent again, he would make sure I couldn't leave the house at all. My heart stopped, then restarted with a cold, focused fury. He had choked her. In the world of domestic violence, non-fatal strangulation is the single highest predictor of future homicide. He had not just hurt her, he had practiced killing her. I did not scream. I did not ask why she hadn't told me. I reached over and squeezed her hand so hard my knuckles turned white. There is nothing wrong with you, I said, my voice fierce. You did nothing to earn that. The shame belongs entirely to him, and we are going to bury him with it. That night, the house was quiet. Derek was out at a client meeting, which I suspected was a consultation with a lawyer or a drink at a bar. Emily and I sat on the edge of my bed. I handed her my phone. We are opening a bank account in your name only. I instructed online, paperless statements sent to my email, not yours. He checks the main account every day, Emily whispered. her fingers trembling as she typed. "We will transfer small amounts," I said. "Grocery money, change, just $50 or $100 at a time, enough to buy gas and food when you leave." We finished the setup, a new account, existing only in the cloud, with a balance of $200. It was not a fortune, but it was freedom. Later, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily, from the room just upstairs. "If I tell him I know about the money he stole from you, maybe he will back off. Maybe he will be scared." I typed back immediately, my fingers flying in the dark. "No, do not say a word. If you tell him, he has time to hide it or hurt you. Let the system speak for you. You just need to be ready to walk out when the door opens." I set the phone down. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for it to snap shut. It was 2 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, a time usually reserved for the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. I was standing at the kitchen island, dicing onions for a pot roast, when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. It was not the singular familiar sound of Derek's luxury sedan. It was a convoy. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the bay window. 3 cars had pulled up to the curb. 2 were sleek black sedans with the tinted windows characteristic of corporate security or federal agents. The 3rd was a patrol car from the Alder Creek Police Department, its lights off, but its presence unmistakable. Derek was in the living room, working from home. He saw the cars and stood up, smoothing his shirt, a look of confused arrogance crossing his face. He opened the front door before they even knocked, assuming, I suppose, that this was some sort of VIP delegation from Silverhawk. "Gentlemen," Derek said, his voice booming with forced conviviality. "I expected the audit team at the office, not my private residence. This is highly irregular." A man in a dark suit stepped forward, bypassing Derek's extended hand to present a folded piece of paper. "Derek Lawson," the agent asked. "We have a warrant to search these premises and seize all electronic devices related to an investigation into wire fraud and embezzlement." What Derek's laugh was nervous. A high-pitched bark. "That is ridiculous. Who signed this you have no right to." "Step aside, sir," the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. Inside the kitchen, Emily froze. The colour drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll on the verge of shattering. I moved to her side instantly, gripping her shoulder. "Stay here," I whispered. A female police officer entered the house first, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Sophie and Liam, who were peering over the banister. She moved toward them with a practiced gentleness. "Hey there," she said softly. "You guys like dogs. I have a partner out back named Buster who would love to meet you while the adults talk. How about we go say hi?" She ushered them out the back door before they could see their father begin to unravel. I watched them go, grateful for the small mercy of distraction. In the living room, the illusion of Derek's power was evaporating. Agents were already unplugging his computer. Another was photographing documents on his desk. The lead investigator turned to me. He held up a tablet displaying a loan document. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, looking past Derek. "We found records of a $20,000 personal loan taken out in your name, with funds dispersed to Lawson Consulting, LLC. Did you sign this application?" Derek spun around, his eyes wild. "It was a clerical error, I told the bank that weeks ago. My mother-in-law she is confused. She forgets things." I was just managing her assets. The room went silent. The agent looked at me. Emily looked at me. Derek looked at me, his eyes pleading, threatening, begging me to play the part of the senile old woman one last time. I straightened my spine. I looked directly at the agent, and then I looked at Derek. No, I said clearly. I did not sign that. And I am not confused. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. That is what we thought, the agent said. He turned to Derek. Mr. Lawson, turn around and place your hands behind your back. You can't do this. Derek screamed, the sound raw and ugly. Emily, what are you? Tell them I did this for us. You ungrateful. That is enough, the officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto Derek's wrists. The metallic click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. They marched him out the front door. I watched through the window as the neighbours peered through their blinds. Derek Lawson, the man who thought he owned the world, was shoved into the back of the police car, his head pushed down by the officer's hand to protect it from the doorframe. Emily stood by the sink, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. A social worker who had arrived with the police stepped into the kitchen. Mrs. Lawson, she said gently. My name is Sarah. I am here to explain what happens next. Your husband is being charged with multiple counts of fraud. Because of the evidence your mother provided last week regarding the identity theft, the bank was able to freeze your joint accounts this morning before he could liquidate them. Emily looked up, her eyes wide. Freeze them. But the money, it is safe, the social worker assured her. He was trying to move $80,000 to an offshore account an hour ago. The freeze stopped him. The money is still there for you and the children. Emily turned to me. She looked at the woman she had treated as a burden, as a piece of furniture. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. How long? How long have you been doing all this? I picked up the knife and set it down next to the half-chopped onion. Since the night he first touched you, I said. But the real call was made last night, when he slapped you in front of me. By 6 o'clock that evening, the house was silent. The heavy, oppressive energy of Derek's presence was gone, replaced by a strange, hollow quiet. We sat around the kitchen table eating pizza from a cardboard box. Sophie took a bite of her slice and looked at me with big, confused eyes. Grandma, she asked, why did the policeman take Daddy? Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at me, helpless. I wiped a smudge of tomato sauce from Sophie's cheek. Your daddy made some big mistakes, I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. He hurt people, and he took things that didn't belong to him. The police are helping him take responsibility for that. Is he coming back? Liam asked quietly. Not for a long time. I answered. But we are going to be okay. Our job now is to live properly. We are going to eat our dinner. We are going to sleep without being scared. And we are going to breathe. I looked at Emily. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling freely for the first time in years. She nodded. And for the first time, the silence in the house was not empty. It was peaceful. 3 weeks later, the air in the lawyer's office smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. Emily sat beside me, her back straight against the chair. We listened as the attorney read the terms of the separation agreement. The house in Alder Creek would be sold. The proceeds, along with the assets Derek could not touch during the federal investigation, were being moved into a protected trust for Emily and the children. I was listed as the co-trustee. Emily reached for the pen to sign the permanent restraining order. She did not hesitate. 2 days ago, we had sat in the kitchen and listened to the recording I made of Derek, planning to put me in a nursing home to seize my assets. That audio file had shattered the last remnant of her guilt. She signed her name with a flourish, the ink dark and permanent. I held her other hand, and for the first time in years, her palm was dry and warm, not cold with sweat. The preliminary hearing was the hardest part. Seeing Derek in a bright orange jumpsuit, his eyes rimmed with red, was a shock. He did not look like the master of the universe anymore. He looked small. When he saw us, he tried to lung toward the partition, his voice rising in a desperate, angry plea. "She is senile," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She doesn't know what she is saying." She was manipulated by her old friends at that cooperative. When the prosecutor asked me to describe the events of that Sunday, I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply recited the facts as if I were reading a grocery list. "We were eating dinner," I said into the microphone. "He hit my daughter. I cleaned up the wine. I went to the porch. I called Marcy at the crisis line. My calmness was the weapon that finished him. It stripped him of the drama he craved. He wanted a fight, but I gave him a report." After the hearing, while the bailiffs were preparing to transport him back to the county jail, they allowed a brief, supervised exchange through the glass. Derek leaned in, his breath fogging the partition. "You destroyed this family," he hissed, his eyes full of hate. "You broke everything." I looked at him, adjusting my glasses. "No," I said softly. "You broke it yourself. I just called the people whose job it is to clean up the mess." The hardest conversation was with Sophie and Liam. We sat them down with a child psychologist present. We did not lie, but we did not burden them with the heavy, ugly truth of adult crimes. "Daddy made some big mistakes," Emily told them, her voice steady. "He hurt people, and he broke the law. So he has to go away to a special place to learn how to be responsible. It is not your fault, and we are safe." Life began to settle into a new rhythm. I moved out of Emily's house and into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a building called Maple Court in downtown Alder Creek. It was modest, but it was mine. I had my own key, my own mail, and my own kitchen, where no one told me I was in the way. Emily rented a small cottage 3 blocks away and returned to her old job at the community clinic. One rainy Tuesday evening, the 3 of us, Emily, Sophie, and Liam, sat around my small circular dining table. We were eating bean soup and toast, dipping the crusts into the broth. Soft jazz played from a small Bluetooth speaker on the counter. Emily looked around the cozy room, then looked at me. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I used to think, I thought you were just an old woman who needed a place to sleep. I didn't think you could do all of this." I smiled, feeling a deep, weary warmth in my chest. "I just made one phone call. Emily. The rest was the system doing its job. And you? Walking out the door yourself." I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled and spotted with age, but they were strong enough to hold a spoon, strong enough to sign a check, and strong enough to dial a phone. I realized then that the revenge I wanted was not to see Derek suffer. It was this. It was the sound of my grandchildren laughing. It was the sound of spoons clinking against bowls without the undercurrent of fear. It was a home where the only things that collided were cutlery. Later that night, after they had gone home, I turned off the kitchen light. The street lamp outside cast a warm, yellow glow across my table. My coat hung by the door, in the pocket. My cell phone sat silent. The contact list still held the names Marcy, Martin, North Wind. I knew that if anyone ever raised a hand against my family again, those numbers would light up the dark. But tonight, the screen was black. I would not be silent ever again. But for tonight, I could finally rest. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you folks are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people who might need to hear it. Stay safe out there.